With the history of racism and police brutality in the Los Angeles Police Department, this year is starting with an alarming trend. 3 people have been killed in 2 days. Takar Smith was killed on January 2nd. Oscar Sanchez and English teacher Keenan Anderson both died on January 3rd. LAPD officers fatally shot Takar Smith, who they allege had a knife. Oscar Sanchez was killed because they say he was threatening them with a metal rod. And of course, Keenan Anderson was tased to death. Chief of LAPD, Michael Moore, made this statement following the uptick in police-related deaths. He said, "These cluster of events, while miles apart, deeply concern me. My commitment to the families is not just the condolences, though. It's my commitment to ensuring the greatest transparency as possible, as much as the law allows, to include the details of the investigation, as well as the findings and my recommendations, eventually regarding the actions of our people." Karen Bass, the new mayor of Los Angeles, is also raising her concern with this statement. "We must reduce the use of force overall, and I have absolutely no tolerance for excessive force. We must also lead our city forward, finally, on the mental health crisis that's been under investigation." Joining us right now is retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. Glad to have you back on Roland Martin Unfiltered. So when you look at that statement from the police chief, but you look at 3 folks already being killed, how do you square that?
Well, let me say this. Our police chief is savvy. He's used to doing these kind of interviews in front of a bank of cameras. And understand this. He is nearing the end of his first term. He serves at the pleasure of this newly elected mayor, a black woman. He wants a second term. And so while he's saying all the right things publicly, at the end of the day, the buck stops with him. He will adjudicate all 3 of these uses of force. And he will determine what, if any, action will be taken. It could be something as simple as officers being retrained with regards to the use of the taser and deadly force, up to days off without pay, and ultimately termination. He has the final say with regards to all that, and we may never know because he said he'll do what and say what he can as the law permits.
That particular point there about being, media savvy, he maybe wants to get reappointed by this mayor, and by saying that, well, this deeply concerns me, but again, when you look at her statement, the problem that I keep saying as well is if you have to do something when you keep having these mental health crises and you have officers who are responding and they end up killing somebody.
Well, let me say this about the 3 incidents, and they're all different, so we have to take them each individually. And so I call balls and strikes. Deadly force is not anything an officer wants to use, but sometimes we have to after we've exhausted all other options and means that are available. And I think in each of these instances, deadly force was used, as we're taught and trained, as a last resort. The problem that I have, however, with the 2 that involve the officers discharging their weapon is the number of rounds that were fired. We're trained and taught to fire 2 rounds in rapid succession and then to reassess whether or not a threat still exists. When the officers did use deadly force, they were confronting armed individuals. And I encourage everybody who gets a chance to listen to me to watch all 3 videos in their entirety. Each is about 30 minutes from varying perspectives of the officer's body cam.
What are your thoughts about the young man, the English teacher who happened to be the cousin of Patrisse Cullors, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter? There are some who said, well, look, he caused the accident, he was on cocaine, and frankly, he committed suicide by police.
Well, listen, he was under the influence of cocaine and marijuana, according to reports. He was involved in a traffic accident and was acting very bizarre. Again, that video, too, is available to be viewed. He was running in and out of traffic while he was coherent enough to say they're trying to George Floyd me. He was also saying, I've been accused of killing CeeLo. They're planting drugs in my car. And so I don't know what actually was going on with this young man. I think the use of a taser was appropriate. I'm not sure that he needed to be tased 6 times. Certainly there were sufficient officers on scene, in my belief, based on my training and experience, where you could have dictated 2 officers each grab a limb and let's get this guy in handcuffs. So I don't know if the cocaine in his system or any other diagnosis that he might have in terms of his medical condition were contributing factors. But at the time of this incident, no one knew he was Patrice Coulor's cousin. No one knew he was under the influence of cocaine. And they did what they needed to do in that moment to keep him from killing himself because he's running in and out of traffic.
Ray made a point where you're talking about, well, should have been tased 7 times. Carl Douglas, the family attorney, was on yesterday, and that was something that I noted. I counted almost 8 police officers who were surrounding him, and I'm sort of thinking the same way you are. You mean to tell me that 8 cops, 1 guy, they can't actually subdue him without tasing him 7 times?
Yeah, that's the problem that I have, and that's something that they're going to have to address when this thing is investigated administratively. But again, understand Chief Michael Moore has total autonomy in terms of what he does with those officer or the officer who kept laying on the taser button, discharging those volts into Mr. Anderson's body. And so again, it could be something as simple as retraining the officer and officers on that department about proper use of a taser. So, we'll find out, maybe not, how this is going to be handled in terms of what discipline, if any, the officers are going to receive. But I think at the end of the day, there'll probably be culpability pointed in all directions.
The thing that we often talk about on this show really comes to actions of police officers. And what I keep saying is, look, death is death. It is final. You don't come back from that. There's no check that you're to come back from. I totally understand when officers are faced with a life or death situation, but I just think that in situations like this, you got to be far more aware of that and not just go to as hard as possible. And I think, again, this is where I believe training, this is where expertise comes in. This is also where humanity comes in.
Absolutely. And listen, there was somebody on scene dealing with Keenan Anderson, the gentleman who was involved in the traffic collision, who was tased 6 or 7 times. Certainly somebody in that group of 8 officers that I counted could have said just what I'm telling you now. Hey, I need 2 people on his arm. I need 2 on his legs. And let's get this guy into custody. Tasing is appropriate, but the number of times that he was tased is problematic for me. And so the officer is going to have to explain why he thought it was necessary, because at some point, then it begins to look like punishment for not complying as opposed to trying to get someone into custody for their own well-being.
All right, then. Well, again, we'll see exactly what happens with these investigations. Cheryl Dorsey, always a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, we come back. I'll talk about this with my panel.